This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The automobile changed America forever, but before cars connected the nation, they had to prove they could survive it. My guest today is Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Eric Moskowitz, author of The Hardest, Longest Race, Henry Ford, and the Cross Country Contest That Changed America. This fascinating work uncovers the remarkable story of the first true coast to coast automobile race in American history. A grueling 4,106-mile adventure across mountains, rivers, mud, deserts, and nearly impassable roads. It's a tale of daring drivers, corporate rivalries, innovation, deception, and Henry Ford's determination to prove the Model T could conquer America. Eric's deeply researched narrative brings this forgotten chapter of American history vividly back to life. I'm happy to have, for the very first time, Eric Moskowitz join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. My pleasure to be here.
How did you first discover the story of the 1909 ocean to ocean race, and what convinced you that it deserved a book?
That's a great question. So I stumbled upon it. I mean, like many journalists, particularly feature writers, you tend to find stories in unexpected places. In this case, often that comes from conversation, or you may see something posted on a bulletin board or hear from a neighbor. In this case, I had covered as a young reporter at the Boston Globe back in 2007 a budget crisis in the town of Stoneham, Mass, which is a suburb about 20,000, a little north of Boston. And the budget crisis was so severe they were going to cut high school sports. And I was a suburban reporter. They sent me in. I wrote a few stories. They came up with a trash fee to save high school sports. Like many reporters, covered that and moved on, and did not really sort of pay much attention to Stoneham after that because I was working on other beats. But I wound up on a listserv of people who got activated in this community. And I mean, we all sign up for listservs and we don't always necessarily read them if our inbox is crowded. And every week I would get the local government agenda for this one town, among dozens and dozens and dozens of towns in the Boston area. And I can't tell you why, Steve, but like one day in the newsroom, in the spring of 2009, the weekly agenda for the Stoneham Select Board came across the transom, and I had not read the previous 50, but I thought like, oh, why don't I click on this today and see like, are they arguing about something in this one town that might be of interest to Globe readers, even if they live elsewhere in the coverage area? Or is there some, zoning dispute or something thematic? And so I read through it, and it's just like standard municipal government fodder. And then all of a sudden, at the very end, there is like a commendation or proclamation honoring the forgotten Shawmut Motor Company, pride of Stoneham, and the rightful winner of the ocean to ocean race for the Guggenheim Trophy in 1909, which Ford cheated to win to promote the Model T. And I was like, what? This like, if you're a reporter and you read that and like the bells don't go off in your head, like, you're in the wrong line of work. So I went over to my editors and was like, I need to write a story about this. I did a feature for the Globe at the time of the 100th anniversary, and I'll say that June, the race took place in June 1909. That June of 2009, Model T enthusiasts were retracing the 4,100-mile route from New York to Seattle, and they had done that for the 75th anniversary in '84 as well. But for the first time, they had extended an olive branch to this community outside Boston that had built this little known, totally forgotten car that is the rightful winner of this race had Ford not engaged in subterfuge. So,
You
and
described
so,
this as,
yeah.
as America's first true cross country automobile race. Why has such an important event largely disappeared from public memory?
Well, I think I think that there's a wider I think things often disappear from memory, first of all, that like we remember what we remember, we don't remember what we don't remember. But I often find someone, as a storyteller who dips into the past, um, the number of times I come across things and bells go off as I'm looking through the archives and nobody knows about it, or it's some disaster and there isn't a plaque up. I mean, I think in general, collectively, we can only remember so much. But then in this case, like who writes the stories, right? Ford prevails in this race or appears to prevail in this race. They get caught cheating. They get stripped of the trophy and the prize money 4 months later. But by then, they've already wrung a considerable amount of global publicity out of it. And like then at the corporate level, they kind of go quiet about this. And so, where they may have continued to sort of like tout it much more even for years after that. Like it it wasn't like I mean it was a sort of complex tale that maybe they preferred to uh kind of let slide past. And then they did actually in 59. I mean, if we were talking about this in 1959, listeners would know it because the Ford Motor Company by then felt like enough time had elapsed. We can celebrate this thing again, and they went on a massive sort of promotional tour where they retraced the route. It happened to coincide with the production of the 50 millionth Ford, which was a Galaxy, and so they took a Galaxy, they put a museum exhibit on wheels, pulled by a Ford truck. They put out a replica of the winning Model T, a Model A, a Model K, and they took that across the country and they got a ton of coverage in 59. They also had with them at the time a model of what they said would be the 100 millionth Ford produced in the 1970s, the car of the future, a floating Levicar, which did not quite come to pass. But uh, yeah.
The amount of original research in this book is extraordinary. What was the biggest challenge in reconstructing a race that took place more than a century ago?
So I think the biggest challenge is that I wanted the story to feel observed. I mean, that's how I write. I'm a narrative storyteller. And if I was doing this about something that happened a few years ago, if I don't have the opportunity to see it firsthand myself, I would interview everyone who witnessed it, everyone who participated, gather up all the video footage, all the photography, everything that exists out on social media. When you're trying to tell a story that feels like you're right there along in the car or that you're observing it as the cars move past in 1909, it's much harder. Only a smattering of photographs survive, largely from the big cities. There are newspaper accounts, many newspaper accounts, but like, that is a sort of accumulating an image from tiny fragments or puzzle pieces. And so you're trying to drill down into the story any way you can. I got very lucky. Um, Whenever I came across a name that seemed even halfway promising, I would not only try to learn everything I could about that person from newspaper databases that have been digitized or from genealogical records that you can get through Ancestry, where, oftentimes you can get a fuller portrait of someone from their vital records. I would also try to cast forward and see if I could track down people in the present. And in a few cases, I found families that had letters sent home from the race. And that's extraordinary because it gives you, it gives you something that it's like it makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck if you're a researcher and you find that stuff because it puts you in the car. It lets you experience what the drivers are experiencing in a way that reporters who saw them when they came through wouldn't have uh, gotten a full sense of. And it also gives you like interiority, like sort of emotional experience. I mean, if somebody's writing about it, like, take the Shama car, for example. And I think each of the cars in the race, to a certain extent, are characters, as are their crews. The race ultimately, there are a number of cars in the race. They think the race is going to be much bigger, but it basically comes down by the time you get halfway across the country into a dogfight between two Model Ts, and Ford has entered two Model Ts in the race to double his chances. And the Shawmut, and they're very different kinds of cars. And each of them is a kind of David versus Goliath in its own way. Ford is already a pretty big company, not by anywhere near the standards it will become, but they have produced, in their best years, as many as 10,000 cars. They've been around for 5.5 years, have produced almost 20,000 cars in total. And now with this new Model T, they feel like they have cracked the code for a lightweight, affordable car that will also, for the first time, be durable. And when we say affordable in 1909, we mean $850, which would translate to like just under 30 grand today. And many more cars back then were cars for rich people, cars that would cost $5,000, be a six-figure automobile today, be much bigger, much heavier, a lot prettier to look at. And so, the cars in this race are mostly those luxury cars against these little Model Ts. And the Shawmut is building one of these cars for like gentlemen, as they would have put it, in those days. But they're a small company that right as they're getting out of the gate, after investing a lot in R&D and getting some good press, their factory burns down. And they're left with only a couple cars. They're all but finished. They enter this race as a Hail Mary. They feel like if they can win, if they can get national publicity, they will attract the investment needed to start over with a new factory in Boston. So they're underdogs in the sense of like trying to save the business, but they've got a big, expensive car. Ford is an underdog in that they've got a little car for the masses potentially, but they have a much bigger company and support network. So they're like really going at it. But to be able to get to letters from the Shawmut car, the mechanic on the Shawmut car, I mean, it gives you like an emotional heart to the book, I think that you wouldn't otherwise get. And starting out, I didn't know I would find that. So I feel very grateful to the families that saved these letters and then shared them with me.
This race wasn't just about speed, it became a battle between the competing visions of the future. What did Henry Ford hope to prove by entering the Model T?
So, even Henry Ford had no idea that the car would become as widespread as it is. I mean, ultimately, he will sell 15 million Model Ts over the next 18 years. I mean, that is staggering. Like within a few years, half of all cars on the road will be the Model T. By the 1920s, people feel like, they couldn't dream of not owning a car or giving up their car. They would rather make cuts anywhere else in the family budget. But in 1909, uh, it's still only 1 in 500 Americans have a car. And that has rapidly changed. At the turn of the century, it was like 1 in 10,000. So I say that, like, it's gone from being like the sort of devilish plaything of the gilded class to like a coveted luxury item. People in 1909 want it. They know the price is coming down. But they don't know exactly what the future looks like. I mean, it's like a personal computer in the late 70s. Like most people, even the experts, couldn't have told you like where we would be by the end of the 80s, let alone in 2026. And that's really what the automobile scene was like in '09. But what Ford was getting at is that he could see that it was t that like there was a middle class market clamoring for cars. And to the extent that people could already afford a car that was like 800, 900, $1,000, but were holding off, they were holding off because they felt like if we wait a year or two or three, these cars will be much better than they are now. They'll be more reliable, they'll be more durable. And he felt like with a Model T, he had that car. He just needed to demonstrate it to that consumer class, and the race was the perfect way to do it.
One of the book's biggest revelations is that Ford's apparent victory wasn't legitimate. No spoilers here, Eric, but how did you uncover what really happened?
Yeah, it's funny, no spoilers, Steve. And I think, for anyone who knows anything about capitalism, period, it's probably not a great surprise that Ford ends up cheating to ensure victory. But I knew the broad strokes of what had happened, and some of when I set out, and then I drilled down to get the details. Some of the stuff that like seems for sure like cheating, but can't be definitively pinned down. For example, there's just like no way it's a coincidence. Like, for example, the only way to drive from St. Louis to Kansas City in those days was to cross the Missouri River. The way to do it was in a sort of old riverfront post called Glasgow, Missouri. You would get to Glasgow, drive aboard a ferry. I don't mean like the kind of ferry that would take you from the Cape to Martha's Vineyard today. I mean, this is like a little raft that would fit one or two cars, a couple of people, surrounded by some planking, and has a tiny little motor on it. And at this point in the race, Henry Ford is in Glasgow. The two Model Ts come in. They get aboard this ferry. They go across from the east side to the west side of the Missouri River, and disembark. And then right behind them, two other cars, the Shawmut and then an Acme made in Pennsylvania, pull up, expecting this ferry to then come back for them. And instead, the ferry is just tied up on the opposite bank, and nobody can understand why it hasn't come back. And like, they do some investigating, and lo and behold, the ferry tender claims that his propeller just happened to break down, like at the very moment that he brings the fort across. And it just like it defies belief. Like even people nearby think that money must have changed hands, but there's no way to prove that. The way that Ford ultimately gets caught is that you could not change any of the parts on the car. That you could change parts that were subject to wear and tear. So you could change tires, you could change the clutch, you could replace brakes, things like that. But major components on the car were stamped with a distinct pattern using a stamping hammer at the starting line, like what we think of today as like a barcode. And that was going to be inspected at the finish. But when you were supposed to keep those parts in the whole way, and if they broke, you had to like do laborious repairs. Ford has an engine breakdown on the Wyoming-Idaho border. And instead of doing basically complex open heart surgery that will also involve needing to like sort of ship in a specific part, they end up just popping out the engine, popping in a whole new engine, which was not kosher, and then setting the car on the road, and then taking their time with repairs to the original engine. Once they've done that, they put that on a train, ship it ahead by rail, and then pop the original engine with the markings back into the car so that when the car crosses the finish line eventually in Seattle, it looks like it's carrying the original engine from New York. And it's only months later that Shawmut, with the help of like railroad investigators, is able to get like a smoking gun in the form of a shipping receipt showing that Ford had done that. So,
Mhm. The race covered more than 4,100 miles before the interstate highway system, of course, or even reliable roads. What were the biggest physical obstacles facing the drivers?
yeah, you're absolutely right. Before reliable roads, I mean, in the east and around major cities, you do have paved roads. I mean, they're not like paved the way we would know them today. But in much of the country, particularly west of the Mississippi, you're going over wagon trails, really. And in some places, they're only even like faint traces of wagon trails. And so there are the physical obstacles. You have to deal with the elements like in Kansas, the skies open up day after day after day after day after day with like biblical rain.
Right.
And then the drivers encounter what are known as gumbo muds, which like, many of them were Easterners. I'm an Easterner. I did not know that like mud is not mud. If you add water to the soil of like the Great Plains, it just like absorbs it and turns it into a kind of like magic mucilage. I mean, it clings to itself, it clings to anything it touches. One writer of the day says it like clings to you stronger than a long lost brother. And so, like, as the cars are trying to like grind through this gumbo mud, it is sticking to itself and sticking to the cars. And it's basically like carrying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of excess baggage. And they're constantly stopping to fight through it and to scrape it off any way they can or to hose it down if they come to a town. They've got to cross mountain ranges that like nobody should be crossing, even like on foot, let alone in a car where there's no real roads going over. So that is part of it. But then the other part is that like there's no wayfinding, right? Like there are no road signs in most places. Um, so they have like a very slim directions booklet that had been prepared by a pathfinder. And we say a pathfinder, we mean a crew that had gone out a few months earlier to try to figure out what the course might be. And they had such a hellish time. I mean, it took them 2 months to go from New York to Seattle. They got shot at by a farmer. They one night, I mean, there are no motor lodges. One night they're bedding down in a locomotive roundhouse, and tramps who don't like that they've taken their place to sleep sort of attack them. They end up having to ship the car in May by train over the mountains in Washington because there's so much snow. So car companies hear that and they're like, we don't want anything to do with this race. But they do come up with like a not very good directions booklet that they're able to send back to the crews. In the case of the Fords, because Ford has a burgeoning dealer network, he has locals every 50 to 100 miles who can help tell these cars where to go. For the others, they're doing it on an ad hoc basis, and they quickly realize that this booklet of directions, which is like when the road forks by the yellow schoolhouse, look toward the tree and cross the trolley track. It's like if you've lost it, like there's no going back. There are no mileage markers or anything like that. So like they are picking up wherever they can guides of varying abilities, and it is, I mean, it's a real adventure or misadventure to try to drive across country at that moment in time.
The race becomes almost a portrait of America in 1909. What does it reveal about the country at that moment in history?
I think to me it reveals two things. One is that you know, they really felt. I mean, I think people always feel they're living in the most modern of all moments, but particularly in 1909, there had been so much change in the previous few years, the previous generation or two. I mean, there are people alive then who remember a time before railroads and telegraphs, and now suddenly you can pick up a telephone and talk to someone as if they're in the next room, have a business meeting without traveling. You have automobiles. You have aeroplanes. Any day now, someone's going to fly across the English Channel. Zeppelin is experimenting with airships. They talked a lot. You could cross the country by train in 4 or 5 days. They talked a lot. The phrase was annihilation of distance, annihilating distance. They felt like the country and the world was shrinking down so that like places you could have never imagined visiting or being connected to by message or by voice, you could now connect to. And so they felt like they were living on the cutting edge. And yet we look back to them and think like, what a quaint period. I mean, 1 in 500 people owning a car. The West is like scarcely populated. And so it makes me wonder like how people will look back on our own age 100 plus years from now. But the other thing that is clear is that particularly in the West, you have cities that are rising quickly. Denver, Cheyenne, Wyoming, places like that, where they have money. They're growing by leaps and bounds every 10 years, and they have some of the highest automobile ownership rates in the country at that point. But then you go into the rural places, and you still have pockets where like people haven't seen a car before, and you can drive all day and not see any signs of life. And I think you're about to have this moment. I mean, the country's at an inflection point where America is going to change because of the automobile, and will look dramatically different within just a matter of years and decades.
Eric, what do you hope readers take away when they close that last page in the book, and not only about automobiles, but about America itself during this transformational era?
Oh, so I'm not I'm kind of allergic to making sweeping statements, but one thing I think that I hope they take away is that there was a sense that the automobile could do no wrong, that it was going to be the cure to everything that ails us, that it was vigorous exercise, if we can think of it that way, to drive in an open air car, that it would end the monotony of rural life, that it would be a great tool for bringing people together. They could not imagine traffic jams. They didn't even have traffic lights. There was no thought about, air pollution, carbon footprint, anything like that, let alone the ways roads and highways might be designed to perhaps bypass many of the communities that were thriving in those days. And so there is a lesson there for unintended consequences with new technologies. But mostly, I hope that people are drawn to this as a really good yarn about a way we were uh, just over 100 years ago, and that as much as this is a story about Ford and the makings of the Model T, which is a car that ends up going on to change the world. Um, this isn't abstract history. Like I hope that people feel a connection to the very individuals who got in these cars from a variety of colorful backgrounds and tried to drive cross country at a time when, as one of them said later, we could not have worked harder if we carried the car across the country on our backs. And then some of the people they met along the way and the ways that Americans were encountering the automobile when it was not regulated yet. I mean, am a parent of a new 7-year-old, and in Abilene, Kansas, where Dwight Eisenhower had just graduated high school and the race is coming through, the most famous resident of that town was a almost 7-year-old girl named Bessie Colson, who was already an experienced motorist, which is like mind-boggling
Mm.
to think a 6-year-old girl is driving a car. But her dad sold Buicks, and he wanted people to see that, you don't need to be afraid of this new technology. It's so simple, even a child can do it. And there's no driver's licensing back then. So he just puts his daughter behind the wheel, even though she can barely see over it, and has her drive around town giving demonstrations. So it's like, the way I think the book is full of um, reminders of how different time was 100 years ago and also how similar.
What is next for you in your writing?
So I have a new day job at Harvard. I've been a newspaper journalist most of my career. Now I'm a staff writer at Harvard doing feature stories about life on campus, faculty research, things like that. I'm also doing some freelance magazine work. If you ask my wife, hopefully there won't be any book soon. This one took a lot longer than I promised her, but I have a few ideas squirreled away that I came across while researching this, and we'll see where any of them lead.
This book, out now, The Hardest, Longest Race, is a thrilling blend of history, journalism, business, and adventure that shines a light on the incredible chapter of American history many readers have never heard before. The Hardest, Longest Race, Henry Ford and the Cross Country Contest That Changed America is available now wherever books are sold. Eric Moskowitz, thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure, Steve. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching and for listening. And don't forget to subscribe to the Speaking of Writers podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Richards. Thanks again for watching and listening. I will talk to you again next time.